Hi, it's amazing to be here. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me start by telling you just how different this audience is. So I'm usually called in to rally the troops. I'm usually called in to get people excited about whatever the next thing is that's coming. It occurs to me you are the troops and you've been rallied. So this conversation feels a little different, and if you hear me be excited, it's exactly because I want to tell you about why I am joining you in championing the great work that's happening at this college. And I do mean that truly and sincerely. I know you heard a little bit last night about, obviously we're a Summit on the Future, and you heard a little bit last night about what this future entails. And so even though I know a good bit about the Gettysburg approach, and we'll talk a little bit about that, that framing is important. That framing of what the future is critical in terms of both how we're thinking about that from the standpoint of higher education, how other people outside of higher education are thinking about higher education. And so it occurred to me that of all the representations that we can think about in terms of the future, we ought to talk a little bit about the tension in that. And so when I talk about future tense, there is both a forward-looking grammatical nature of that, but also a little bit of a tension in that too. And part of that is because the future right now feels different. It feels a little chaotic. In thinking about representations and looking at background images, I looked at these images of chaos theory. They're actually images of this, renderings of this. This is one of those renderings. So I wanted to start by just talking a little bit about what begins to shape that tension, right? So let me just put some images on the screen here. What do these things have in common? One more here. Aware of and wary of, sure. Yes, yes. What disruptors? Did I hear that? Oh, good, we got disruption in the room. Good. Good to get disruption in early. Yes. Anything else come to mind? They feel new, right? The wariness, the disrupting. I think part of what contextualizes, I tried to find really disparate things, the ways in which we think about artificial intelligence comes up quite a lot, but how many people have, maybe Emily, has heard of marine heat waves. Does anybody know what a marine heat wave is? This is me as an NPR geek, listening to NPR, hearing about marine heat waves, which is an abnormal heating of seawater relative to the air temperature, most likely caused by climate change. And what caught me in that report was that this is now a problem that simply did not exist 10 years ago. And so when I put this slide together, when I put these images together, it was both thinking about the disruptions now, what feels pending, but also what simply didn't exist 10 years ago. How will we equip students for a future and the jobs that do not yet exist? Now, and I'll go a step further, right? Because this isn't just about job skills. It's not just about the technical skills to understand micro-transport or what we dealt with COVID, but the profound social and ethical issues that come with each and every one of the images that you're seeing. The layers of complexity of what truly make somebody equipped to deal with this level of disruption, this level of nuance and complexity and change in our world. When I think about how higher education is situated in that landscape, and when I think about the jobs for the future, it's all of that. It's all of that coming together. So the first thing that I want to do is let's just name the tension in that, right? Because there's a good bit of excitement in that, but we'd be really remiss not to identify some of the tension that goes along with that. And it occurred to me, right, in the, I think, 5,000th time of reviewing these slides, that I should have said tensions, right? It's as if it's one exquisite one, which maybe at the end of this we might decide there is, but there's certainly multiple tensions going on. And really, as I go through and showing you a good bit of data, I'm a sociologist, I can't help it. I'm going to show you a good bit of data, but I also want you to kind of remember what some of these tensions are underlying this data. So, one of those tensions is how higher education is perceived today. It's grab a number of any one of reports, and you will hear something along the lines of the declining public trust and confidence in higher education. The Gallup poll's been studying this for ages. The Gallup poll has also been studying public trust in institutions broadly for decades. And I will tell you that higher education ranks about 4th from the top in that list. So relative to other things, we're not doing that bad. I don't know, as a friend's mom told me once, like, I don't know if you want to be top of the bottom, but it's true, it's a problem. It's definitely a problem. But here's where, this can be a tension, this is a tension, but part of the other tension that you should know is that we found through our own reports and research, working with employers and surveying employers over a number of years, actually about 15 years, been our most recent survey. And I also did a research report with the Bipartisan Policy Center, and we also found a similar finding. Employers are pretty optimistic about higher education. So when you survey the general public, or when you begin to get an idea of where that confidence lies, it becomes really important to identify who you're talking about. Because employers still see a good bit of value, say important amount of value in higher education. Now this is from our 2021 report. I'm going to show you a lot of data from our most recent unpublished 2023 report that's going to be released in early November. This is the first time that I'm talking through some of these data with you, so I'm excited to do that and show that. So in 2023, we asked it a slightly different way. We asked the degree to which, these are a sample of employers, we asked the degree to which you are, get this to come up, there we go. 48% said they strongly agree with this statement. I am confident that higher education is preparing graduates to succeed in the workforce. About half, and I think you heard something similar last night from Jamie and Carrie. That was from our 2021 report. That only, depends on how you spin it, right? Only about half, or at least half. Welcome to the world of statistics. But you have about half that say they strongly agree. Now, if we coupled this with somewhat agree, it'd be a much higher percentage. But the idea of preparation becomes really important, and I know you heard a little bit about the preparation gap last night. And so part of that is a piece that I want to talk through and think about how Gettysburg is contributing to that and really paying attention to that preparation gap. Still, 48%, about half of all employers in this sample, are saying that they strongly agree, there wasn't a higher bar, strongly agree that they're confident. So one tension, right, is this public perception of the worth and value of higher education versus who we might say are rank and file that are working most directly with college graduates. And how do they perceive that investment? What do they think the value is? And we would still say this looks like a pretty good story. But here's another tension, and I want you to hold this. 55%, a slightly higher percentage of employers under the age of 40. We started doing this in 2021. We started disaggregating. We always did by gender and race, even hiring managers versus CEOs. We just never found significant trends. There's always going to be bits and ebbs of differences, but real trends we never found until we disaggregated by age. And I'm going to drop in some little kernels as we go through here just so you can get a flavor of what it means to think about what really are the next generation of employers who will be hiring Gettysburg graduates and who will be paying attention to higher education, and I would argue paying attention to higher education in ways that will feel very good for liberal arts colleges in exactly places like Gettysburg. So one thing to know is that this group of employers is a little bit more confident, a little more optimistic about that value. So remember that one. But there's also a tension in what students say and what students perceive. Good to say this right after they've left. Good timing on my part on that. They would have raised their hand right away and said yes to all this. This is from Wiley. This is the Wiley publisher, their State of the Student report. I like looking far and wide for the kind of data that I pulled into this. This made some waves, that 55% of the students that they had surveyed in this report said that they struggled, they found it a challenge to stay engaged and interested in their classes. 81% were saying how important it was to find company-led, real-world projects that help them to apply their skills. A dramatically different percentage of students actually said they experienced those, but this was a resounding voice of saying we want these experiences, we want our education to be applied. So attention and even what students perceive and how they think this process works. But now look at this one, right? Again, I'm being so sociological up here. I'm sorry. There's a lot of perceptions that are at play here. There was also a question that asked students versus instructors, how well prepared do you think your students are for employment? And asking students, how well prepared do you think you are for employment? And look at this difference. For the reality check of what it means to be working with faculty and also working with students to help understand that they get these messages and everybody's on the same page. This is not the first time we've seen faculty-student perception differences, by the way, so don't let this one shock you, but it's important to remember and to keep it in play here. One other tension, and this is also going to be a tension about employer age differences. This was the first time we asked a question. This is from our 2023 unpublished report. I'll make sure you all get it when it's released. But this is the first time we asked about this notion of a well-rounded education, right? A term we use all the time. We love this term. This means a lot to us. We want students to have they can even parrot it back. It's the scariest part of it. They even want a well-rounded education. They don't even know what it means. So we asked employers if there are certain characteristics of a well-rounded education, which of the following characteristics do you think matters a great deal for career success? Here's what we found. 59% employers said they thought hands-on application of ideas, 56% encouragement to think for oneself. This becomes a critical aspect of what higher education can do, is engender that inquiry and freedom of thought. But look at the dramatic difference between employers under the age of 40 and those over the age of 50. Yes, there is a group in between. We just didn't find as many differences there. This was the true age split. Under 40 versus over 50 and how they value community-based experiences. Something that I know is at the heart of what Gettysburg does and what we might think of as a liberal arts education really providing. You're gonna see a through line on this. But again, this sort of tension in this next generation. And the thing that I like to point out about the employers under the age of 40, these are the oldest millennials. This really is that generation that is voting with their dollars, is really thinking about social investment, one of the most socially and racially conscious generations. So this is really important and interesting stuff. So since I had the opportunity to show you a little bit about characteristics of a well-rounded education, I wanted to show you one of my favorite quotes. This is legendary. This is from a survey I did about a decade ago, a study I ran with a colleague, Tia McNair, who's our Vice President for Student Success at AAC&U. We did this study about 10 years ago. There's a quantitative portion of this, but we did focus groups all over the country, well, actually 3 states, working with about 100 students. And we were asking students, what does it mean to be engaged in learning? What does it mean to be engaged in college? So forth. So this student, one of the students from our focus groups in 3 of the schools that we worked with in Wisconsin said, I don't know too many jobs. The job is being well-rounded. You know, it's not like you're going to go work for well-rounded ink or something. So I really wanted to follow up those descriptions, those characteristics of what it means to be well-rounded with this simple notion that as we use that term, as we use it interchangeably with some sense of a shared understanding of what that means, in many ways students have no idea what that means. Have no clue what that really translates into, and even better, like how would they communicate specifically what it means to have had those aspects, those characteristics of a well-rounded education. So I want to get into a few aspects of what I think, using that as context, those tensions as context, of what I think are really setting the stage for a new approach in higher education, and why we're here. How the Gettysburg approach actually contributes to that. Starting with that quote that you just saw, what underlies that, more importantly than anything for me, is this notion of transparency. That it will become increasingly clear, right? This idea of, hey, we're higher education, trust us. We got you. Whatever you do here is gonna be valuable. I think that day has passed. The time has come for banners. The time has come to be clear and explicit. Not just that you will have a number of experiences randomly scattered, but more that we will help students construct something with those, something meaningful. And I'm gonna give credit to my partner for saying to me when I showed her these slides, do make sure you note that you're doing transformation in that. You actually managed to pull the 1 inch transformational. I was like, oh yeah, that's great, that's right, that's right, that's right. And transformational at the same time. So it is that transparency, that level of helping students to take that experience and actually translate it in a meaningful ways. And of course, right, that is not just saying we have skills, that is being clear about what those skills are and how they contribute. So what you're seeing here is 2023 data from the employers that we talked to, about 1,000 of them. And you can see, so this is a ranking of on a 10-point scale, 10 being very important, or the most extremely important, or like the most important. These are the scores of 8 to 10 on all of these characteristics. And I've gone to the trouble of starring the ones that are most aligned with the enduring skills that Gettysburg's identified. And you're working with intercultural fluency. We didn't ask about that specific language. Language is important, context is important. But working with people from different backgrounds, I absolutely think is a key in how you're going to define intercultural fluency, or at least what that term kind of in part says to me. We consistently find how valuable that is, not just to employers, but to a wider general public as well, and including all the way to leadership roles. You'll see that one pop up in a moment as well. You can see just a high endorsement for how these skills are actually translating within the workforce. But being transparent with students, actually helping them to understand and hold these skills will be so important to them. For the first time in 2023, this might shock you. For the first time in 2023, we asked employers what kind of knowledge matters. Higher education has long been out of the knowledge delivery business. What I mean by that, of course, we care about knowledge. We have a bunch of people like me and like many of you that, right, are experts in their fields and deliver that knowledge. It's the content delivery business. It's the ways in which we use knowledge that will become increasingly important and translatable within the classroom. It will become more and more meaningful to help students make sense of the chaos of all of the knowledge that's out there, right? So we've long known that it's been this combination of breadth and depth that's been important, certainly to higher education. It's why we have things like core curriculum, general education, why we've always married that with the majors. But we also want to know, like, how does this translate for employers? What do employers tend to think is most important? We used to just ask them about breadth and depth. You know, do you just want technical skills? Do you want broad skills? And they were like, can we pick both? And so we always found them picking both. And so this time, for the first time in 2023, we asked specifically. So 66, ratings are very important again. If I would have combined these with somewhat important, much higher percentages. I'm doing the very top here. So very important knowledge from addressing real life problems regardless of discipline. So increasingly critical to think about how disciplines contribute, but how we're also looking across them, right? And how we're finding those real world stories and applications. But this is where, can we have both? They still want the disciplines too, right? That's still gonna be important. STEM fields, obviously, had to ask about that. But what about this one? Ooh, ouch. This increase, and this is all employers. What do we do about the liberal arts and how that factors in? At the same time that we want to balance these broad skills, you heard these amazing stories from Sarah and Emily about how they're using these skills and applying them. How do we elevate the liberal arts to make sure that they know? I think what's happening, the Gettysburg approach, is a key factor in that. And wait for it, we found this in 2021 as well, because we also asked a version of this question about the liberal arts in 2021, but not this exact one. Look at this. Employers under 40. 2 out of 5 employers under 40 think these are very important. If I add a higher score, next level, be even higher than this. Really see value in how, at least more than other employers, in what the liberal arts is really contributing to this equation. So this is, again, a very important trend that we have caught on to and will continue to follow, and I hope you do too. I hope you keep bringing back your alums, all of the alums, but particularly your young alums who really speak to what it means to how the liberal arts have affected their lives and affected their jobs. And ultimately, when I think about what the curriculum contributes here in this layer of transparency, it's being clear about how the curriculum across all disciplines, right, really delivers in multiple forms of inquiry, integrative thinking, all of which is there, right, in the Gettysburg curriculum, communication skills and informed citizenship. And at the heart of it, I do think these are the questions we're asking about. What does it mean to be an educated person at the core? For those yet to be constructed problems, for those yet to be constructed jobs. So the other thing that will be key for higher education, no question. So transparency, really being clear about this is what we do, this is what we're about, these are the skills that we help you acquire, this is how you integrate knowledge and find knowledge as a coupling with that. What will also be key is to think about the holistic part of that experience. How and why will it necessarily take a curriculum and a co-curriculum to fully educate a person? And you don't need me to stand up here. You have both your own experience and I'm sure plenty of engagement with higher education to know the sides of the house do not often talk to each other. That students, and I've long said this, have come through faculty, have talked to plenty of students, right? The dirty secret in higher education is that students think they'll do all of their learning outside of the classroom. That is the wake-up call. So figuring out the way in which we actually connect the learning experience in meaningful ways will become paramount. How do we take what are often the spools, the beautiful, tightly wound, independent spools on our campus, those silos, and actually braid them together. Actually weave them in a way that helps students to put the pieces of the experience together. Chris mentioned that one of the things that AAC&U is known for, you wouldn't have to know us because of this, but many people do know us for, is this work, our work around high impact practices. What are mostly the most effective and engaging educational practices, tons of research around each of them, highly positive effects on student outcomes, all those things. What we really wanted to know though too is we know they sort of matter for learning, But we also wanted to know from employers, did they stand out to you? When you're looking at a pile of applications and resumes, what experiences stand out to you when you're reviewing candidates? If I'm a candidate and I might have a work-study experience or I developed an electronic portfolio, how much more likely would you be to consider me as a candidate? And we've known for a while, we've been tracking this, but we've known for a while that they tend to move students up, that these look like differentiators. And guess where the kinds of places are that students are going to get those experiences? Places like Gettysburg, where you have the opportunity to not just get one, right? But multiple engagements in these kinds of experiences over time. And I also know from that Wisconsin quote that you saw a moment ago, and I mentioned the quantitative portion of that. I won't show you all of those slides, but we also know there are dramatic and cumulative effects. The more that students engage in these experiences, the more and the greater boost in positive outcomes that they have, the greater actually positive perceptions they have of their own learning. And these are even more dramatic, tend to be more dramatic for students from underserved backgrounds. They're like, all good stuff. That's like all good news. But added to that is this idea that employers actually also value these. And you can, right, you could just do the kind of checklist and go, what do you offer at Gettysburg? What are the kinds of experiences? What are the kinds of opportunities that work here? And you might have already seen this coming, but these are the ones in which we not just see differences. By employer age, we see dramatic differences by age in how younger employers value, and you might notice a commonality across the ones that you see starred here or flagged. They tend to be community-based. They tend to be oriented towards real-world problems, leadership roles, engagements that are getting students out of the classroom and engaged in those hands-on applications. This is great news. And it's great news for the work that's happening here and the great news for a program and an approach that's already happening, right? That's already in progress. This would be my big sell to say to a group of faculty or student affairs professionals, you should do this. And at least I get to look at you all, it's like, I'm so glad you're doing this. It's gonna make all the difference. So that's great news. And of course, as I mentioned a moment ago, really finding those connecting points. I can't tell you enough, again, in all sincerity, as I talk about what Gettysburg is doing as a leader in higher education, and I promise you I will, a big piece of it will be your work around guided pathways. Because it's one of the most creative, thoughtful, substantive approaches to actually integrating the curriculum and the co-curriculum that I've seen. And it's because of these reasons. It's because it's not a single experience. I can't tell you how many colleges and universities I've worked with that have thrown up their hands and they're like, we've got something great in the first year, and we got something going on in the junior year, and then of course you've got capstone, and they have no idea what's happening in the sophomore year. So the idea that it's an actual path, it's an actual pathway, where there's actual connections over time. Students have the opportunity for multiple engagement, multiple forms of inquiry, multiple chances for application. Don't undersell the certificate of completion. I love seeing this. I can't wait to see what happens with it. You know why? Because I could have shown you a bunch of slides on asking employers about micro-credentials. 40% of the 39% of the employers that we surveyed already offering micro-credentials. Another 38% said they were planning to in the future. It is the opportunity now for colleges and universities to get there first and to have an opinion about what a quality credential means. I can't tell you how important this piece means to me and to do it well. And I have a good good bit of faith in the quality of what the Gettysburg certificate looks like here, but how important it is to recognize that we're in a different era for recognition and what it means to signal achievement. Students can put that certificate on their LinkedIn profile. That matters. It really matters. And the personal advising team, the idea that students will walk away from this college not just having one shot at somebody who is looking out for them, but multiple people who are looking out for them. You could raise your hands right now, right, if you had more than one mentor in your life. All of us have had more than one person that have impacted us, and I can't tell you how many colleges and universities are slow to understanding that. That one advisor is just not going to cut it. That to really support students, you need to be doing so much more than that. And to enable them with multiple perspectives and viewpoints and supports for who they're going to be. And in part, and I'm drawing from Lambert and Felton's work on this, which is terrific, on a relationship-rich education. They talk about this concept of having a constellation of mentors. This idea, right, that it just takes multiple people to support us. And in part, what they're onto is that even from an employer's standpoint, it is about the enduring skills, it is about knowledge, but it's also about mindsets and dispositions, aptitudes, the intrapersonal and interpersonal qualities that give us the confidence to express those skills. In 2021, we really started asking employers about these skills, mindsets, about these qualities or capacities. You could use lots of different language to define them, but it was really important to begin to draw them out. Like, are we crazy? We're starting to talk about these things in higher education. We've known for a long time, like social emotional learning matters. Faculty will even talk about agency, taking initiative. Does that matter to you? Does that matter to you in the workforce? And if any of you are employers or work in this world, do you know that it does? And if you reflect back to the slide that I had a moment ago with the enduring skills, all those set up, you can see these rank just as highly. And because I can't help myself, I have to show you the runners up. The runners up being emotional intelligence and comfort with diverse perspectives. We asked about 11 of these, all rank very highly. Where will students get those? Where will they get the reinforcement to be able to think for themselves, to have self-confidence, to be motivated, to get that support? It's going to come in part from personal advising. That's the piece of that integration that's going to be so critical. So, what could this be? There's another layer here. So it's not just that transparency and integration will be so important for all of higher education. Here in my mind is the real difference maker. It's that it's actually authentic to what that place is. That it's actually distinctive with a nod toward the context and place and the culture of an institution. Everything I just showed you in certain ways can happen lots of places. But to make it uniquely Gettysburg, it's going to be really important. And when I'm working with a place, and what I've been so impressed with, truly start to finish, with how Gettysburg has approached this work, is I have seen it rooted in that mission, in that authenticity of what will it mean to take the best parts and the most innovative parts, the most disruptive parts of higher education and anchor them here into a Gettysburg experience. Did you need someone to show you the Gettysburg Address? You're welcome. Should we just recite it by heart? Well, hey, lifelong learner. Like I wasn't like super familiar with it. But I can tell you from the moment I started having the conversations about the Gettysburg approach, this was what my thinking was pulled back to because of Chris and because of the leadership here. And thinking about how is that going to inform the approach and the work that's being done? It is for us, the living, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work that became so powerful, those words. The unfinished work that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish. When I think about the anchoring here at this institution, I am excited about all the pieces, everything that's happening in these banners. I am so excited about the connections of citizenship with this work. I am so thrilled by the authentic connections with a commitment to democracy that many, many institutions are struggling with. Higher education writ large is confronting in many ways. But the way in which Gettysburg is positioned not just to lead in all of these ways, but to do it from a standpoint so fundamentally rooted in all of American higher education, but squarely within the mission of this institution. And where I think the sweet spot is this threading together is that connection of citizenship and careers. This idea that students don't have to choose, as they so often do. That they might go to the Center for Community Engagement one day, and then they might go to the Career Center the next day. And those places are very far apart on campuses. So how might they see that the skills of citizenship are the skills that can inform their career success? What does it mean to be an ethically and civically informed professional? These are sort of, and you might be stunned by it, but sort of radical ideas out there. These are really feel like a binary. And I think the great opportunity that you have, that you're already embracing, is to thread those. Because here's what's really interesting. And this isn't just one piece of evidence, but historically, they haven't been separated. This is new. This idea that citizenship is over here and your life as a career person is over here. And this is words from the Truman Commission report in 1947. This report's largely looked at as seeding the commitment to a rise of community colleges, actually. But it's a really profound document, obviously coming right off of the Second World War, and a recommitment to how students were emerging in the GI Bill. So individual freedom entails communal responsibility. The democratic way of life can endure only as private careers and social obligations are made to mesh. This idea that financial and economic thriving of the individual is intimately related to the thriving of communities, and seeing the connections between those two. This is probably one of the ideas, you might hear it in my voice, I'm most excited about. I most see a gap in many ways in higher education around this issue because so few see it, actually. And I thought, well, you know, it is Gettysburg. Maybe, just maybe, do they have something already cooking around this idea? You know, in addition to the Gettysburg approach, but and it ends up, it took me like 10 seconds on the website to find this great work by the Eisenhower Institute. So the Gettysburg College students apply knowledge and skills to make an impact around the world through these summer career opportunities. For example, this student, Caroline Jordan. Caroline's not in the room. Caroline, we already kicked her out. She's out, okay. But yeah, this Eisenhower Fellowship allowed me to connect with Gettysburg alumni in similar career paths to analyze how my degree can impact society and learn about the opportunities available after graduation. Just the notion to be related in a career that will impact society, that would form and guide your sense of who you are as both a professional and a citizen seemed profound, and to have made that connection so early on. I'm so excited about the ways in which these seeds are already happening, have already been planted, already beginning to grow. I'm from the Midwest, so I'm going to stop with the agricultural metaphors right there, but you're picking up what I'm putting down. So I need to end because we have other things to do, but I wanted to come back to as final point, like how to end on that. And I wanted to share with you one thing that I learned about chaos theory. And if there is anybody in this room that actually knows about chaos theory, I'm sorry. But here's what I learned. By the way, weather is often brought up in terms of chaos theory. So the idea, right, that the outcomes of something are infinitely unpredictable, right? That part of what the science of chaos theory is this notion of unpredictability. But here's what was powerful for me in reading just a little bit of this. The elements of chaos are known. That is like a double pendulum, is what this represents. That as you add pendulums to each other, it's the motion, and the motion itself becomes more and more chaotic as you add these degrees to it, right? But the elements themselves are the same. The elements themselves are known. And so what I find, just to conclude, is the great power of what's happening here is the understanding of the elements. That you cannot predict the future. You will not. But you can get the elements right, and you can invest in those, and you can lean into those, and that will make the difference. Thank you. Okay. Do we want to take a couple of minutes if people have questions or comments? Usually I just like to flee. But I'd be delighted if you have questions or comments or want to push back on anything. Well, let's chat. Yeah, please. I think people are running mics, so I can hear you. But they give a mic right here.
To what do you attribute the differences between the, say, under 40s and over 50s employers?
I mean, who knows? I mean, I'm just trying to be a responsible researcher and say I don't know specifically because we haven't done like focus groups, but I do think there's an important generational difference there. So it's not that we're not looking at employers over the age of 50, it's that really from last time we conducted the survey in 2020 really, and now 2023, we looked at 60 and above, and that 40 to 49, we just didn't see a lot of differences there. It really is that split from under 40 to over 50. What I attribute it in part to is that generational difference, that these are the oldest millennials. It's a very different context, a very different world in which they've come up. Also, they're also a group that came out of college right at the financial crisis. So they're actually not a group that has tended to trust a lot of social institutions. So I think we need to understand more. But in terms of the social consciousness of that generation, I do think and that's what we saw in 2021 too, with our analysis in 2020, 2021, was this consistent favoring of these community-based experience and emphasis on social justice, for example. It's something we're gonna continue to look at, but so far we're the only association that's really teased that out. And so I was heartened to see it remain a trend in 2023. So we'll keep looking at it. But, yeah.
Here goes. If we were on the wrong path, would you be standing there and saying, ladies and gentlemen, you're getting it wrong? I am inspired by what you have to say, that our path is correct. I think collectively we could say that was really inspiring. And as a consultant, you're in the business of doing that. And have you stood before an audience and say, well, you got it partially right, but I see opportunities to do something significantly different?
Okay, I don't know if I caught like all of the questions, so.
Well, if we had this wrong, would you be standing there and saying, not so fast?
I would have declined the invitation.
Good, thank you.
I do think it's really good work, though. It was just really easy. It was one of the, I might have shared this privately, I guess I didn't share it up here, but when Chris wrote me with the invitation, Chris can say this, we don't know where Chris is, right, you're right here. You could say, I think it's in an email. I wrote back and said, it's always good when somebody invites me to do a talk and I know what I want to say right away. I do think there's a lot of pieces of this that you've got a lot right. If you're looking for some honesty and some sincerity, it still has to be implemented, still has to be pulled off, right? There's still work to be done. But I am emboldened with the level of substance and thoughtfulness that's gone into it up to this point. The videos that already exist about students actually telling the story. There's so many things that I didn't put into this that I think are really powerful. That I think there's a lot of elements that point to this is really something. Yeah. Mm-hmm. We got a comment here and here, or maybe back here. Okay.
It's desirable, it's noble. Is it affordable?
I can't answer that question, but I hope so. Can I say one other thing about that, though? Having actually spent my career at private institutions, that the common refrain from when students transfer, when they leave an institution, is I couldn't afford it, so I left. And when I was in those conversations, when I was at Dominican University, for example, on the West Coast, we had the data that showed that students transferred to institutions that were equally expensive. So usually the affordability question is also about, is it worth the money? So I do think the value proposition and how you communicate the value proposition is absolutely critical. Sure. I know we have a comment here, and then.
Okay. I want to address that question. Is this on? Okay. I want to address the question. Part of what we're doing is building on foundational strengths that we already have. You've heard it from our student today, you all have experienced this. We have our students engaged in hundreds of extracurricular activities. We're bringing it together in a more systematic way. Yes, it requires some investment, but in large measure, we are harvesting the benefits and the strengths of this college in the first instance, and I think it will more than pay dividends, the incremental cost that's associated with standing this up, and I think we're already seeing it. This year, the pathways are entirely voluntary. 78% of our students have already said, we want to participate in this. So I think the proof is in the pudding here, and the incremental cost, which is not extraordinary, is really just amplifying the inherent strengths of the college and organizing us in a way that hasn't been organized previously. So I think it is affordable, and of course, you all can help it make it more affordable, which is why we are here today by virtue of your philanthropy.
I know I'm holding up the agenda too, so.
In the beginning of your talk, you talked about trust and a decrease in trust in higher education. Based on the data you showed, do we just need to wait a little bit?
I know. No, I don't think we have the luxury of that either. I think I use the age stuff more as like, good news is coming, like even better news is coming is more like in that vein. Yeah, so I don't think we can afford to wait and be silent, but we can also lean in and we can also be recruiting and thinking about how we're really interacting with employers of all age ranges, right? And thinking about the diversity of the employers that are really out there. Maybe just this last comment here.
I'm having one of those moments where you say this is where your life has come to meet, because I just recently left a job where I was charged with institutionalizing guided pathways at a community college. And I did say this morning that this college is on a very strong start, and you should all be commended. It is hard work, and if we are here to start to kick that off and help you think strategically, it's going to be a long road, but it's going to be a really good road for these students. And I want you all to know that. And it does take a little money, I will say that, but this place is so ahead of so many other liberal arts schools, and we have a population that we're working with that is very different from the community colleges, but this is going to really change the world for them. And so I agree with everything you're saying, and this is going to do wonderful things for our college.
I love that you have that perspective from the other guided pathways work. Yeah, we're glad. Maybe just this final comment here.
So it's okay if you don't have an answer. I am coming from the perspective of working with historically excluded communities, being a part of those communities myself. You said you're a sociologist. I'm also a sociologist in my training. What tips do you have for an institution like Gettysburg as we're taking this pathways approach to ensure that we are supporting the most marginalized students? And I want to tap into something you really said and really think about the history and foundation of higher education, with our authentic roots really being rooted in exclusion and moving into performative inclusion in some ways. And you don't have to have that, but what tips do you have for us to make sure we're doing the most for all students and not just some students?
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you asked that, and I'll promise that this won't be nearly as long of a response as I'd like it to be. Equity is more than disaggregating data. Equity is more than thinking about diversity. Equity is equity. So the first step is actually defining that word and what it means at an institution, and then certainly who are the students that fall under that. At the end of the day, equity for me is, I've heard this quote a long time ago, but equity is a pair of shoes that fits. Equity is about thinking about what individual students need for their success. I would mostly always say advising. Advising is a huge piece of that, and I think so that's an element that's really right here. But that, I would say beyond that, is thinking about inquiry, how students are being enabled to ask their own questions, to respond, to draw upon their strengths as students, their cultural backgrounds, appreciating those as strengths and not deficits, and recognizing who. Speaking of disaggregating data, one problem that a liberal arts college of this size will always have is small sample sizes. So there will be a temptation to say, well, we really can't say anything because it's just too small of a sample size. I don't care. There are students behind those numbers. So find ways to hear from students, find ways to hear about what they want and what they need, and I think that's already an approach that's been taken here, I know, very thoughtfully. So that's critical for sure, all those pieces. Thank you, it's been a pleasure. I'm sticking around so we can still talk. Yeah, thank you.